This is chapter 3, and if you remember, Moon is stuck in jail, and Mr. Wellington's going to help him out, and Moon's like, hey, did he call yet? Did he call yet? Did he come? And the officer there is getting kind of annoyed by Moon, asking him all the time, how long has Moon been in jail so far?
2 days.
Like a day or two, right? And so now he's like kind of disappointed. He's not eating. The cop's like, he gives him some food for dinner, and Moon doesn't eat it, which is not like Moon, because we know him as somebody that eats and eats and eats and eats when he gets good food.
I bet you he's sad about something.
So he is sad that Mr. Wellington hasn't picked him up yet, but he also doesn't have anywhere to go, so he's kind of like reserved to the fact that he's just stuck in jail. Now, somebody said yesterday, like, well, you can't go to jail if you're not 18, and that's probably pretty accurate. This is a fiction story, and it fits the story, and they're holding him, but he also doesn't have a family to go to, so where do you take a kid like that? A place like Pinson, which is a boys' home, might be a good place, or a foster family, but we just haven't gotten that far yet with Moon. He already broke out of Pinson. Here we go, chapter 43. That night I dreamed of being holed up by myself in the old shelter where I lived with Pat. Bigfoots came out of the forest and tore at the walls. I sat on the high pile and I clutched my rifle, even though I knew it wouldn't do any good against something as large as a Bigfoot. Eventually, I crawled into the stage 2 box through the muddy hole at the back of the shelter. I heard the Bigfoots digging at the ground. Before long, they were banging at the top of the box with their fists and scratching the door with their fingernails. I felt them rolling it out of the ground like a piece of culvert pipe and working themselves into a howling frenzy. And then suddenly, I couldn't hear him anymore. I saw the doorknob to the little steel door at the end of the pipe begin to jiggle. I waited while my heart thumped loudly in my chest. It was just a dream. Presley, you were scared, weren't you? Were you scared? You're okay?
It's a dream?
Sure. Do you need a minute? He's okay. I'm just giving you a hard time, man. When I woke, Officer Pete was opening the door to my cage. Let's go, kid. I sat up and looked out, getting my bearings. I rubbed my eyes while he waited with hands on his hips. Let's go, he said again. I don't have all day. I put on my hat and I grabbed Kit's. You want to put some handcuffs on me, I asked. We don't put handcuffs on kids, he said. You're no threat to me. I followed him into the office. As we approached the outside door, he turned to me. Now, stay close. Don't stop to answer any questions. Just get in the car. I didn't know why he told me that, but I got up next to him. When he opened the door, I understood what he was talking about. Cameras were flashing and people were everywhere. Please stop. Thank you. Hey, Moon! Moon, they shouted at me. Say something for us, Moon. Who's your lawyer, Alabama Moon? We hear you got a lawyer. Why'd you turn yourself in? I grabbed Officer Pete's belt loop and he pulled me along to the squad car. He opened the back door. And I jumped in. I sat up on the seat and watched the people gathering around and flashbulbs going off near the window. Wait for us, Moon! Wait for us! Hey, bare your teeth for us, Moon! I looked at Officer Pete in the rearview mirror as he pulled away from the crowd. He glanced back at me and shook his head. You're a real pain in the ass. You know that? He said. I didn't do anything to those people out there. For somebody that hasn't ever done anything, you sure do have a bunch of folks stirred up. We going to see the judge? That's right. That's what you wanted, isn't it? I was just wondering. I'd be more than just wondering if I was you. He's pretty pissed off over all this. He wants to know just what he's going to do with a 10-year-old who shot at a law enforcement officer. I told you, I know what you said, but you got a half-crazed constable for Sumner County that says he'll swear on a Bible otherwise. Well, he'll be lying. Now, why would he lie about something like that? I don't know. Officer Pete shook his head. I don't know either, he said. Officer Pete took me into the courthouse through the back entrance where there weren't any reporters. He put me into another cage and left me alone. I sat there for an hour before he came back again. All right, he said, Judge Mackin's ready for you. He said if you get to acting crazy on him, he's going to put you in a straitjacket. Gentlemen, close your computers, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'm beating you too.
Close it.
Oh, man, really?
Presley, it's being very disruptive, so please don't do that anymore. Thank you. He said if you get to acting crazy on him, he's going to put you in a straitjacket. What's that? Something you won't like. Now, come on. When I walked into the courtroom, the first person I saw was Sanders. He sat in the front row and stared at me with his swollen face. He wore no expression and seemed to look right through me. My heart started beating faster when I saw Mr. Wellington in front on the other side of the courtroom. He was dressed in a three-piece suit and his hair was slicked back behind his face that was all scrubbed, shiny. Except for a guard at the entrance, the only other person in the room was Judge Mackin. He sat behind his desk on a raised platform in the front of the room with one elbow on the desk and his cheek pressed into his palm. He had white curly hair, a pink face, and droopy eyes that reminded me of a wild hog. Glasses sat perched at the end of his nose, and I heard him breathing heavily. When he spoke, he sounded tired. "What is that on his head, Officer Pete?" It's his squirrel hat, Your Honor." "Well, get him to take it off," the judge mumbled. "Yes, Your Honor." "You know better than that. I don't care how old he is. Take off the hat, Moon." I took it off and put it under my arm with Kit's hat. The judge moved his eyes to watch me as I followed behind Officer Pete over to where Mr. Wellington stood. "Why does he have two?" the judge asked. "It's all I got left," I replied. The judge squinted at me. "Was I talking to you?" "No, sir." "Well, then you stay quiet until someone asks you a question." "Yes, sir." Officer Pete dropped me off next to Mr. Wellington, and I felt proud to have him on my side. I smiled up at him. "I thought you left me," I said. Mr. Wellington put his finger to his lips and motioned for me to watch the judge. I felt him pull my hats from beneath my arm, and I saw him set them on the table in front of us. I looked at the judge and then over at Sanders. His eyes danced like the inside of his head was on fire. "Now," Judge Mackin said as he removed his glasses and began to clean them with a handkerchief, "we got an unusual situation here. Because of that, I'm closing this hearing to the public. Another reason for that is I got a bad headache and all those people out there are driving me crazy." He set his glasses on the desk. "Moon Blake," he said, "you stirred up quite a commotion out there. I don't like commotion. I don't like people who shoot at law enforcement officers, and I don't like people who eat other people's dogs." "Sanders is a liar," I said. "Hey," the judge snapped, "did I ask you a question?" I looked at Mr. Wellington. He put his finger up to his lips again. The judge licked his mouth and turned to Sanders. "Okay then, let's get started. Mr. Sanders, why don't you come on up here and give your side of the story?" "I'm a constable, Your Honor." "Whatever. Get up here." Sanders acted like he was about to say something, but then he twisted his mouth around and stood up. He walked to the front of the room and stood before the judge. The judge winced and shook his head slowly. "What did you get into?" "Poison ivy," I said. "He got into..." The judge jerked his head up and pointed a finger at me, and his eyes grew wide. Mr. Wellington bent over and whispered in my ear, Moon, you can't speak in here unless you get permission." The judge continued to watch me as he held a book sideways towards Sanders. "You're not going to lie now, are you?" Sanders put his hand on the book, shook his head. "No," he said. "Good," the judge replied. He put the book on his desk. "Go on then." Sanders took a deep breath and sat down. "I'm going to tell this one more time. You will tell it as many times as I want you to tell it. Just because your daddy's some small town judge over there in Sumner County doesn't mean you're getting any kind of special treatment." I saw the veins on Sanders' forehead stand up as he clenched his teeth. He stared at the back of the room at some place on the wall behind us. After a second, his veins relaxed and he continued. "This boy is a son of an outlaw. He's..." Mr. Wellington stood up. "Irrelevant, Your Honor." The judge sighed. "Mr. Sanders, it seems we got a fancy big city lawyer to deal with today, and he's right. Sustained. Did this boy attempt to shoot you or not?" "He did." "With what?" "A pistol." "What kind?" "A .45. "Where did he get it?" "He stole it from me." The judge leaned back in his chair and watched Sanders. He stole it from you?" Sanders' veins rose again and relaxed. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked at me. I nodded to him, and his eyes grew wide. Are you agreeing that you stole it from him or that you shot at him?" "I stole it from him," I said, "but I never shot at anybody." He turned back to Sanders. "Well, the kid admits he stole your gun now. How did you let that happen?" I leaned forward, but Mr. Wellington pulled me back. I saw Sanders kneading his hands together. He was still staring at someplace on the rear wall. I was asleep," he said. He's lying, I whispered to Mr. Wellington. The judge cocked his eyes at me. It's all right, Mr. Wellington said. We'll tell the judge when it's our turn to talk. The judge continued to watch me out of the corner of his eyes while he talked to Sanders. So he got your gun while you were asleep. Now, what's next? Well, he just backed up and he pointed it at me, and then he shot at my stomach, and he missed. And then he turned and ran off. And he took your pistol with him? That's right. Judge Mackin wrote something down. After a second, he said, okay, tell me about these dogs. I sent 3 tracking dogs after him, and 2 of those boys that broke out of Pinson Boys Home. I heard the dogs yelping. Later, I found their carcasses hanging from a tree, guts laying everywhere, meat clean to the bone. And you say the boy bit you, too? Yes, Your Honor, he did. What else? That's it. Judge sat back in his chair and looked at Mr. Wellington. Okay, lawyer, your turn. Mr. Wellington stood calmly, made his way to the front of the courtroom. He faced Sanders. Mr. Sanders, where were you when Moon supposedly shot at you with your pistol? Sanders looked straight at Mr. Wellington's eyes. I was in the Talladega National Forest. Describe your surroundings. I don't remember. You mean you were lost out in that forest and then shot at, and you don't remember anything about your surroundings? Who said I was lost? Well, just an assumption. Perhaps I'm wrong. Listen here, you slick old son of a... I was just... The judge slammed his gavel down on the desk without lifting his cheek from his palm. I jumped in my chair from surprise. Sanders paused for a moment and then spoke calmly. I was near a creek. And Moon Blake shot at you once? That's right. Once. That's right. How far was he when he shot you? About 10 yards, I guess. He was close. And you saw remains of your dog not far from there? That's right. I see, said Mr. Wellington. Can I remind you, Mr. Sanders, that you're under... He knows he's under oath, Mr. Wellington, the judge said wearily. Now stop fancy-pantsing around and get on with it. Sanders looked over at the judge. Your Honor, I thought this was going to be an informal hearing. How come I got this lawyer in my face? I can't keep the boy from having his own counsel, Mr. Sanders. Sanders shook his head and looked back at Mr. Wellington. Well, ask what you got to ask, slick. Mr. Wellington nodded politely. Now, you say that you saw the carcasses of your dogs not far from where the shooting took place? That's right. Are you sure it wasn't a single dead deer carcass that Moon had left not far from there? You don't think I know a deer carcass from a dog carcass? And I said there were 3. Very well, Mr. Wellington nodded. He walked to the table where I sat. He reached beside me and pulled a plastic bag from his briefcase. Inside the bag was Sanders' gun. He held it up. Is this your pistol, Mr. Sanders? Sanders' forehead veins popped up again and his eyes grew wide. He stood out and held his hand for it. Mr. Wellington walked over to him and held it out right in front of him, just out of reach. Well, Sanders said, let me see that thing. Well, you can see it fine, the judge said. Now sit down. Yeah, it looks like it's mine. Now give me that. Mr. Wellington swung the pistol away and laid it on the judge's desk. The judge stared at it for a second and then looked at Mr. Wellington. Go on. That's my pistol he stole, Sanders said as he reached for it. Get your hands away from my desk, the judge snapped. I said sit down. Sanders clenched his teeth, sat and stared at the back wall. Mr. Wellington waited a few seconds and then continued. Mr. Sanders, what? Did you shoot that pistol at all the day before Moon supposedly took it from you and fired it? No. And he only fired it at you once? That's what I said. How many shells does this pistol hold? 9 in the clip, 1 in the chamber. Mr. Wellington turned to the judge. Your Honor, if you examine the clip, you'll see there's exactly 8 bullets in it. The bullets are oxidized against the clip, evidence that they've been in there and positioned in such a way for some time and have not been tampered with. Sanders smiled and shook his head. Maybe he shot it again, slick. Mr. Wellington nodded. Yes, he did. Moon shot the pistol twice. Sanders shrugged his shoulders and looked at the judge. Can I go, Your Honor? The judge looked at Mr. Wellington. The lawyer held up his finger and walked to his briefcase. He pulled out some pictures and another small plastic bag with 2 bullets in it. He took these to the judge, set them on his desk. Again, the judge looked down and eyed him. What is all that? Put the bottom down. Don't pick it back up. Thank you. Well, it's a picture of a log with 2 bullets in it. In that bag are the only 2 bullets that were shot out of the pistol. As you know, there are tests that can prove the bore markings and the bullets that match Mr. Sanders' pistol. If you examine this picture and the others I've taken of the log, and I even have the log itself if it becomes necessary, you will see that those bullets are the same ones that are embedded in that log. Sanders stood up. So maybe he fired twice at me. Hell, when you're getting shot at, you lose track of things. This time the judge lifted his cheek from his palm and stared at Sanders. If I have to tell you one more time to sit down, I'm going to throw some rope around you in that chair. Sanders sat with his hands shaking on top of the armrest. Mr. Wellington turned to me and winked. Moon, he said, how is it that we know this log was nowhere near Sanders at the creek? All of a sudden, I knew what he was doing. The answer to his question shot in my head and seemed like it was ringing a bell inside me, because there ain't any pine logs by creeks. They're all up at the top of the hill. Sanders started to get up but sat down again and leaned forward in his seat. Now that's the craziest damn... Hey, the judge said. It's the craziest damn defense, Sanders mumbled. The judge shot him a look and Sanders settled into his chair. Mr. Wellington turned and began to walk to our table. When his back was to the judge, he looked up and smiled at me. After Mr. Wellington sat down, the courtroom was quiet. Everyone watched the judge. He rubbed his temples and stared at the top of his desk. I'm not sure what's been accomplished here, he said to the desk. Bullets in a log, bore markings, inconsistencies in the number of shots. This is pretty shaky, Mr. Wellington. Maybe that log rolled down the hill. Maybe it washed up on the creek bank, Mr. Wellington nodded. Now, I thought of that, Your Honor. With your permission, I'd like to make a few more points. The judge looked up and sighed. Good, that would be helpful. I'd like to introduce my second piece of evidence, my client here, Moon Blake. Yep, bring him up then. Actually, with your permission, I'd like to demonstrate something outside the courtroom. I believe your police department has a shooting range not far from outside of town. I'd like to go there for some of my demonstrations. Sanders twisted in his chair and threw up his hands. The judge stared at Mr. Wellington for what seemed like a long time. Finally said, Wellington, I think this is going to be a waste of my time. You and your fancy talk may work with the jury, but I can cut it down to what it is. You're not a big city anymore. However, it is your lucky day. I don't feel good at all. You give me a nap, and I'll take your country drive with you. He tapped the gavel on his desk. Reconvene in 2 hours. Meet me in the garage so we don't start a parade with all those reporters out there. All right, so what do you guys think he's going to do? Why is he taking Moon to the shooting range?
So because he can show him how Moon fired the gun, and then Sanders will say no, like he did not.
Maybe he'll catch Sanders in some kind of lie because of the way Moon shoots the gun. What did you want to say?
That's what I was gonna say.
You're going to say the same thing? So here's, Sanders is saying Moon was about this far away, like from the wall to me, and Moon shot at his stomach and missed.
But he didn't miss. He hit the log 2 times.
He did hit the log, but that was at a different time. Did Moon ever shoot at Sanders?
No.
No, he didn't. What about the dead dogs? Did he really ever kill the dogs?
No, he killed a deer.
No, and he could prove that that's a deer carcass, right? Like, I'm sure there's tests and studies to prove it's not 3 dogs, it's a deer carcass. What does Moon have on his hat?
A deer.
Yeah, it's from that dead deer, right? So he could prove it was a deer. But what does the shooting range have to do with Sanders lying, Moon getting out of it?
So they're gonna go shoot the pistol, and they're gonna put up a target, and they're gonna shoot at it and see what he actually shot at.
Okay, so how would a target help Moon?
Because they can see.
Go ahead.
How he's had a show of how he shot at the log and that at Sanders.
Okay, what'd you want to say?
I was gonna say that he's gonna use the target, and he's gonna try to shoot. He's gonna say he didn't aim it right.
How good is Moon at shooting guns?
Good.
That's what he's had to do his whole life, right? To hunt? Do you think Moon would really miss Sanders from 10 feet away?
No.
What about 10 yards?
No.
Probably not. I mean, he's a pretty good shot, so I think that target range has something to do with it.